Thank you for listening to We Have Ways of Making You Talk. Sign up to our Patreon to receive bonus content, live streams, and our weekly newsletter with money off books and museum visits as well, plus early access to all live show tickets. That's patreon.com/wehaveways.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Upgrade your business with Shopify, home of the #1 checkout on the planet. Shop Pay boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning fewer carts going abandoned and more sales going cha-ching. So if you're into growing your business, get a commerce platform that's ready to sell wherever your customers are. Visit shopify.com to upgrade your selling today.
¿Hablas español?
Sprichst du Deutsch?
Kann du noch?
If you've heard that sound from Babbel before, I bet you do. Babbel is the science-backed language learning app that actually works. With quick 10-minute lessons handcrafted by over 200 language experts, Babbel gets you on your way to speaking a new language in just a few weeks. With over 16 million subscriptions sold and a 20-day money-back guarantee, just start speaking another language with Babbel. Right now, up to 55% off your Babbel subscription at babbel.com/Spotify podcast. Spelled BABBEL.com/Spotify podcast. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Imagine a world-class graduate education that's accessible, flexible, and designed for career impact. That's Harvard Extension School. Build actionable knowledge and skills in challenging online classes taught by Harvard faculty and industry experts. Explore new opportunities and expand your network with high-achieving professionals from around the world. Part-time learning, real-world impact. This is Harvard on your terms. Learn more at extension.harvard.edu/Spotify.
Achtung, Achtung! Welcome to We Have Ways of Making You Talk, the Second World War podcast with me, Al Murray, and James Holland. 2 years ago, we were very, very invested in it being 1943, the 80th anniversary, and all the stuff in Sicily, then on into Italy, and what was going on the Eastern Front, and then out in the Pacific, and then in Burma and India, and we really made sure that we remember. And then last year, 2024, God, we were overwhelmed with 80th anniversary D-Day.
Oh my goodness!
Oh my goodness me! Big week on the whole stuff, and now here we are in 1945. Basically, it's our last anniversary year for a few years. Is the simple truth on this podcast, because the Second World War didn't last a decade, so we basically get 4 years off, or 3 years. We get 3 years off. Let's be honest.
And the beauty of that is it means that we can go back and do all sorts of things that are non-anniversary related, which will be great, including an entire history of the Second World War in 24 hours.
Entire history of the Second World War in 24 hours. So it's January 1945. What is happening? I mean,
Well, I think 1945 is every bit as important as the previous 2 years. I think the outcome of the war is no longer in doubt, but the piece that follows very much is so, and that is the crucial bit, and that's the crucial bit for today because of what's going on in Ukraine, what's going on in the Middle East, what's going on around the world, what's going on with China, what's going on with the United States, what's the state of Britain and Europe's defences, all goes back to the decisions that were being made in 1945. Yep. And you and I have just been doing this book called Victory 45 about the surrenders and the end of the war, both in Europe and in the Far East, and the war against Japan. And boy, has that been eye-opening, hasn't it? I mean, it's just been so interesting, and way more interesting than I had appreciated.
Well, as a boy, I read Lord of the Rings. The problem with the Lord of the Rings, of course, is the first book is he's making up as he goes along. The second book is where it all kicks off, and you've got Helm's Deep, and it's all really like the book's really throbbing on all cylinders. And then the problem really with Return of the King is it's going to end. You know they're going to succeed. You know that in the end the ring's going in Mount Doom and all that. But 1945 isn't like reading the third book of Lord of the Rings, where you know he's got to wrap things up, because it's the real world. Things don't get wrapped up.
Yeah, and the point is that J.R.R. Tolkien is writing this before and during the war. And that's your point about bringing it up.
Well, exactly. That there is no sense in 1945.
No, and I think that's the point, isn't it? Because what's around the corner is yet more peril. And the peril is we're suddenly in an atomic age of world-destructing weaponry. And we're also facing a new Cold War.
Yeah.
and the problems of China of what's going to, or a hot war.
Yeah, exactly.
And how is the world going to be able to recover economically, culturally, politically, sociologically? How is it going to recover from this most cataclysmic of wars? And all that is incredibly uncertain. And you've also got this stunning change of leadership, except in the USSR. So on the 12th of April, you've suddenly got a new president who is basically a hillbilly from the Midwest who no one has amazingly high hopes for, but actually, cometh the hour, cometh the man. I mean, Truman is one of the great men of the 1940s, and boy, is he impressive. And how he grips the situation. You've also got Clement Attlee taking over from Churchill in the middle of the Potsdam Conference, literally in the middle of it. You've got the end of Japan and the Japanese Empire. You've got an entire total change of dynamic in the Far East and the Asian world. You've got imminent ends of empire as well. So there's so much going on.
Yeah. Well, ends of empire. I mean, really, before you think about the Cold War, because the Cold War is the tyranny of outcome, isn't it? When you look at the history, if you look at it from a European perspective, an American perspective, the Cold War is the outcome of the Second World War. But if you look at it from an imperial perspective, end of empire is the outcome of the.
But anyway, so the point is, but I also think overshadowing all this is the events of 1945, which are just unspeakably grim. Yet the awfulness and the violence are increasing, not decreasing. I mean, one of the worst months of all for the US armed forces anywhere in the Second World War is April 1945, which is where they're doing a hell of a lot of fighting in Europe. But they've also got Okinawa, of course, which is the most bloody of them all. It's all bad. So it's pretty grim. And you've also got the accelerated destruction of Nazi Germany by air forces. This is where you've got 2,000 bombers going over in a 24-hour period. It's a hell of a lot. 800,000 by Bomber Command, 800 to 1,000 by the USAAF. Of the 8th Air Force and the 15th Air Force. And it's just utterly relentless. And I remember when we had Tammy Davis Biddle on, she was talking about the kind of the shadow of what's going to come in Japan, but also this sort of mounting fury that the Germans just not playing ball, that, when you're defeated, you throw in the towel, and yet Germany's not doing that. And there is a kind of visceral anger with which these bombing raids are being protracted, born of frustration and rage in equal measure, because they know that they're going to have to marshal all these forces, whether they be air forces or ground forces or whatever. Every soldier that's being killed in Europe is a soldier that can't be sent into the war against Japan. And of course, the Los Alamos test isn't till July of the atomic bomb, so no one knows whether it's going to be ready in time or not. The invasion, first part of 1945, an invasion of Japan is absolutely expected, and the casualties that are going to be occurred are truly apocalyptic. European theatre point of view, it's just, will you just surrender? You stop surrender, we'll stop bombing Würzburg and Fort Simon and Dresden, etc.
Yeah, well, and, we talk about end of empire, but this is basically the beginning of the end of British influence for choice of victory, isn't it, by this point? The British need the war to have ended by the end of 1944. It hasn't. Obviously, it's one of the three big powers, but it's been dwarfed by the other two, by the US and the USSR. And actually, what is the balance of power now? And what is it going to be by the time war actually ends? And it is interesting. I was reading Alan Moorhead over Christmas, and one of the things he talks about, but he said, broad front isn't going to work. You need a thrust, which the Germans will then seek to reinforce, and then they'll leave somewhere bare, and then you can get them off balance and topple them. And we're wasting time, people, resource, and potential peace by pursuing a broad front strategy.
Well, I think he may well be right.
Yes, two birds with one stone, isn't it?
But what is your thrust? I mean, that's an interesting thing. Got to be the Ruhr area because, well, it's north or south, isn't it? I mean, the thing is every time you're attacking, you've got the desert. Everyone can see you coming. You've got the jungle, nightmare, because it's hot and it's full of snakes and disease and you can't see anything in front of your nose. You've got unbelievable border forests, whether it be the Reichswald, whether it be the Hürtgen, whether it be the Krinkelterwald. You've got lakes, you've got enormous wide rivers, you've got mountains. Take the terrain out of it to a certain extent because everything's got problems. And think, okay, what's going to give you the best strategic opportunity?
And that's his argument.
Well, the big problem is they've run out of time because they didn't do a big thrust in September when they could and probably should have done, they did an airborne operation, which was always going to be, frankly, was done too hastily and didn't quite have the resources to pull it off. The problem you've got by the time you get to kind of October is it starts to rain again, because as I have said many, many times, the winters are awful. And what you see as a pattern, an analog weather pattern, meteorological pattern in the 1940s is very, very wet October, November, December, very, very cold January, February, March. And the problem you've got is that anywhere you attack in a major thrust, you haven't got the road network to support the mechanization that you need to be able to do something decisively. Which is where the broad front then works in your favour, because it's broad, which means you're spreading out more over more rather than concentrating in a narrow space. And the narrow space in winter is really, really problematic. You know, you absolutely want to do the single thrust followed by the back door if it's summer. In winter, I don't think there's an alternative to the broad front. If everything's equal, then the single thrust and the back door option is the right one. In winter, it's just difficult. Germans discover that you have to stick to the roads because the ground is too sodden, too soft, too muddy to go off the roads. The problem is if you use panzers to spearhead, they completely chew up those roads, even if they're quite good roads, which then means that the follow-up of supplies, the echelon, can't deliver.
Well, and the last time the Germans sent a thrust through the Ardennes, it was May, and the tanks weighed half of what they did in 1944.
A quarter,
even. There we are, you see. So, fooled by their own hype and high on their own success and their own mythology, Montgomery actually has to be sat down and told, there is going to be no single thrust. It isn't going to be you.
Yeah.
You need to
read my lips.
And actually, there's a conference he has with Eisenhower in January. He goes, all right, no further bother from me about this. And Eisenhower gets no further bother from Montgomery, which isn't to say it doesn't go back to his headquarters and bitch and whinge and moan about it.
There's lots of reports of these meetings between Montgomery and Eisenhower, whether it be beginning of September, whether it be beginning of November. You know, Montgomery sits down, gives him a spiel.
You can't talk to me like that, Money. I'm your boss.
Yeah, but he also says that, but he also just takes it on the chin and listens. And Monty takes that as acquiescence rather than I'm zoning out. And so if Eisenhower had just said, this is how it's going to be, I just want to disabuse you, you can argue like that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
He might have saved a whole load of bother.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. The mishandling is in that direction, I feel. But
you know the guys you're dealing with. I mean, he spent a lot of time with Monty by then. He knows how he operates. He knows how he thinks. You know, he's a superior. Just put him in his box. Yeah,
there are some machinations by Brooke at the very start of the year to try and get Alex installed, which I think is quite interesting. You know, if you look at his diary entry for the 1st of January, a new year started, and let us hope the last one of the war with Germany. Now done 3 years of this job, and I am very, very weary. I left home early this morning, and after a dark, cold and slippery drive through fog, landed at the War Office at 9:25 a.m. Not much trouble in getting into my stride, as I had brown bags sent down daily with current news. During the afternoon, interviews with Nosworthy, returning from West Africa, with Burrows just starting from West Africa, and with Carton Wyatt back from China. Of Chiang Kai-shek's position, which appears quite secure in spite of all gossip. PM has sent in a regular flow of minutes throughout the afternoon, all of futile nature. This may have been the afternoon where I received 15 such minutes, either based on misconceptions due to faulty readings of documents placed in front of him, or concern with details which he should not get himself mixed up with. As a result, he causes a mass of unnecessary work and clogs the wheels of the machine. But basically, he wants to move Alex out of the Mediterranean and bring him to Northwest Europe. Get him installed, because he thinks Tedder's useless as well. Get him in as Deputy Supreme Commander.
And so what have you done? Swap Tedder down to the Med or something
like that. Then he starts to think, it's too depressing to see how Alex's deficiency of brain allows him to be dominated by others. I mean, what? And then later on he says, I was wrong in saying that. I've often described him as a beautiful Chippendale mirror with the most attractive and pleasant frame, but when you look into the mirror, you always find the reflection of some other person who temporarily dominates him, be it a Monty, an Oliver Leese, or a Macmillan.
I tell you what, Oliver Leese, someone emailed me the other day about Oliver Leese, just as a little sort of sidebar here. And they were saying, what do you think about Oliver Leese? What do you think about him? I said, actually, I think Leese was just a walking disaster. And literally everywhere he goes, chaos and mayhem ensue. And it's true. I mean, Operation Olive, which is the assault on the Gothic line, which launches in September 1944. This is on the Adriatic side of the Gothic line, which is 200 miles north of Rome, sort of roughly from between Pisa and Rimini, right through the Apennines and the mountains in northern Italy, is a terrible plan. Yeah. And the reason it's a terrible plan is because he mucks around with all his dispositions and all his troops and puts all the troops that ought to be in one place are best suited for one course of attack and a place where they're not suited, and, the people, and vice versa.
Yeah.
And it's just, it makes no sense whatsoever. And he fails to break through by a whisker, which he almost certainly would have done had he not just completely cocked things up. Then he gets sacked because of that, and quite right too, and not before time. He gets sent over to India, where he promptly sacks Slim. I mean,
yeah, I know.
I mean, talk about kind of sort of misreading situations. I mean, he's just completely talentless. I mean, you know, if you had a drink with him, and again, he's a bit like Frebe. He's one of these people that, you know, he'd be great fun at a dinner party. But he's too self-conscious about his image and what he's trying to portray, and this sort of, you know, sort of cheery bonhomie and +4s and all this kind of stuff, and rosy cheeks and things. Yeah. And it's all a bit try-hard, and it doesn't come naturally. And he just doesn't have the brains to be able to kind of, or the tactical, operational, strategic nous to be able to pull it off. And I'm absolutely at a loss as to how he got as high as he did. Yeah,
he is a mystery. I think a mysterious character. When he turns up in Burma, Slim's lot, or they've all got too much sand in their boots. Is how they put it.
Yeah.
Because they turn up and going, well, you chaps don't know how to run a war. I mean, it's just extraordinary.
And he's really, really kind of, he niggles Clark all the time. He just does it. He chips away at him, gets himself in a lather. And Clark is superior on every single level. And, you know, when you're looking at Operation Diadem, the fact that 8th Army gets bogged down has been a large part down to him, because he hasn't handled his forces very well. His dispositions aren't good. Again. Anyway, Gothic Line is a missing part of the 1944 80th anniversary.
Yes, yeah. I mean, things are essentially in Italy are in the deep freeze, really, aren't they, at this point?
Yeah, over the winter, yeah. But I tell you what, should we take a quick break? Then we'll quickly look at that, and then we'll go on to where the Germans are at.
See you in a tick.
Hi everyone, it's Catty here from The Rest is Politics US. Anthony Scaramucci and I want to tell you about our new series that looks at one of the darkest days in modern American history, the Capitol riots of January the 6th.
You know, 4 years have passed since Donald Trump supporters stormed the Capitol building and tried to overturn the 2020 election results. And Catty and I are going to explore the tensions and the personalities at the heart of that storm.
Yeah, we're going to look at the whole story, starting off with, of course, the 2020 election result itself, Joe Biden's victory, Donald Trump's attempts to undermine that result right up until January the 6th, and those horrifying scenes that all of us watched on television back then. So don't miss it. Go and search The Rest is Politics US, wherever you get your podcast, to hear just how Donald Trump tried to defy American democracy. And we've included a clip from the series for you to listen to at the end of this episode.
Welcome back to We Have Ways of Making You Talk with me, Al Murray, and James Holland.
Well, I was just doing a character assassination of Oliver Leese.
You were. I mean, you know, I think leave him. He's dead, Jim, is how I felt at the end of that.
He did write lovely letters to his wife.
The thing is, it is a curious business, isn't it, when a general feels the need to project an image. Because you get the feeling with Alex, for instance, he's projecting an image, but it's natural. He's not put on, you know, him in his distinctive hat and all that.
Well, he just thinks that generals should look unbelievably pucker. He takes the Nelsonian approach.
Funny you should say Nelson there. Reading the Nicholson diaries, as I told you, I was doing in the other episode, as I've been doing over the holidays. He says he finds Monty unbearable, but then he says, I expect we'd have all hated Nelson too. Isn't that an interesting thing to say? That these people, they're ghastly people, you know, these warrior people who insist on having a sort of public image. And he says it was the anniversary of Alamein. So he writes this at the October 44.
Well, we should just preface this for those of you who haven't heard the previous episode. You've been reading Nicholson's diaries, and in
Harold Nicholson's diaries, who's a fascinating guy, and during the war he's a member of Parliament, but he sort of done everything. He'd been a diplomat, he'd been at Versailles, he'd sort of been in the Bohemian plutocratic set, as he puts it, in between the wars. He knows everyone. You know, he's been to enough cocktail parties with Edward VIII and Mrs. Simpson to have decided what he thinks of them and all this sort of thing. Anyway, one of those people. It was he writes this to his sons. It was the anniversary of Alamein, and we had on the wireless a message from Montgomery. He introduced few sporting images, but he did end with Kipling's "If." My distaste for that general passes all reasonable definition. It is childish to be deterred from admiration by a few quirks of language and intonation which recall the least pleasant of masters at a private school. He must be a grand stratège. That I am prepared to believe, but he remains distasteful. But then, none of us at the time would have cared for Nelson. I love him for saying that because, but great heroes. I mean, this is a debate.
Great heroes are flawed. That's what makes them heroes.
Precisely, but
Achilles.
and often can be really awful people or people you would not want nothing to do with, which isn't what you were saying about Oliver Lees earlier on.
Well, I know. My childhood hero is Ian Botham.
Yeah. In Italy, things are in the deep freeze. The Italian front hasn't moved. The British and the Americans are settled for the winter.
They went on the defensive. They just went on the kind of called it off. They didn't achieve the breakthrough. They almost got the breakthrough, but they didn't quite get the breakthrough. We're under-supported. We're undersupplied. It's near the end of the war. We know what's going to happen. Let's wait till the weather. Let's not even try it again this winter. We know what happened last winter. And they're quite right. And there's no massive imperative to do it. There's no kind of sort of we've got to get in Rome before D-Day or anything like that.
Yeah.
That's been and gone.
That's all over.
So they can afford to do that. And they keep firing over artillery shells and doing patrols and kind of annoying the Germans and keeping the pressure on and all the rest of it and bombing bridges and bombing Bolzano and Brenner Pass, etc., etc., etc. But otherwise, you don't really need to do anything more. And then it's absolutely the right strategy. And also, they've slightly got their hands full with kind of other issues in the Mediterranean, not least Greece, and preventing it from becoming communist post-war, blah blah blah. So there's a lot to keep their hands full.
In fact, the political energy is on and focus is in Greece, isn't it?
Well, yes, the political energy is, and it's also the and the military energy is obviously in Europe still, and quite right, that's a priority, and there is a manpower shortage. So
it's interesting, isn't it? Because people talk about the mistake Hitler makes is he ends up fighting a two-front war. No, it's not a two-front war. It's four at this stage, isn't it? Basically, absolutely everywhere he's tried to interfere with has been.
It's circular.
And by this stage of the war, he's become more and more reclusive. So he's essentially sort of disappeared, isn't he? And there is a broadcast. He does do a broadcast. Curiously, Nicholson, I'm so obsessed with Harry Nicholson. He listens to Hitler's broadcast on January the 1st on Deutschlandsender. Him and Vita Sackville-West get out the radio.
Because obviously he can speak fluent German.
Yeah. They get the Deutschlandsender and then Hamburg, and we get Hitler's horrible but quite unmistakable voice. The reception is not good, and he gabbles off his piece so fast that I may have missed something. But it seems to consist entirely about reflections upon Germany's fate if she loses her moral staunchness, about the fate of the satellites who've dropped out, about the strength of the Führung, on the need for unanimity, on the Sein oder nicht sein theme, to be or not to be.
All or nothing. 1,000-Year Reich or Armageddon. Have the Germans got the will to do it? And there is a sort of fatalism which has struck the Germans, where there is a still residual faith in the wonder weapons, that somehow they'll turn around the corner, that they have no choice. There is no alternative. What's the alternative? The alternative is Armageddon. So you might as well just keep fighting. All the cities are in ruins already. Everyone's suffered. There isn't a single family that hasn't suffered loss somewhere along the line.
It's so strange. And also that there is also in the background of that picture, well, we know what we've done. They're coming for us.
They will reap what they sow, as Arthur Harris famously said on top of Ad Astra.
But the Germans know that now about themselves. Remember that story of a woman who's sent out to Poland to work on a farm in like 1941, and she beats the staff and thinks to herself as she's doing it, "Well, we better win this war."
Yes. You better have, love. Yeah.
and at this point, they know they haven't. I mean, so the Italian front's frozen. The German Western Front.
Well, last German attack in the Ardennes is 3rd of January. It fails, like all the others have failed.
Yeah.
But
if we're honest, it's over by the 21st of December. If we're honest.
Yeah, it's completely over. Yeah.
We'll be talking about this.
Oh, we'll be talking about this in great detail. In episode 6 or possibly 12 by the time we get to it.
And then on the Eastern Front,
the battering ram is being swung back again, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, just to kind of reiterate the Russian way of doing things, the Red Army way of doing things, is you have this what's called the deep battle. So you just hurtle forward. So what you do is you swing back the battering ram and you just run into the enemy, and you just there's just unspeakable violence. Everyone dies or gets wounded. There's unbelievable destruction, even for the Red Army, and so they then have to pause. So this typically takes 6 weeks of an offensive, something like that, 8 weeks maybe, and then you pause and you build up your strength, and you create another 80 divisions. You send them forward and you start all over again. It's just astonishingly wasteful, but if you're trying to win the war quickly, it's incredibly effective. I mean, interestingly, it's Model who's who was on the Eastern Front, who gets promoted to come over to the Western Front, doesn't he? He takes over Army Group B.
Yeah.
And OB West, then gets demoted as von Rundstedt comes back yet again to command Army Group OB West, which is the whole kind of German forces in the West. Model is then in charge of the Battle of the Bulge. It's obviously a complete shit show. And then he's got to kind of suddenly pick out the pieces. But on the Eastern Front, I mean, everyone's just waiting for the next assault, really.
And they get it as well. It's the thing, because the Soviets aren't really held up by the weather in the way that the Western Allies are, perhaps. They're on that cycle of basically every 3 months an enormous hammer blow one way or the other.
Exactly. And it's about to come in January.
Yeah, exactly.
And that obviously leads to the liberation of Auschwitz on the 27th of January.
Yeah, so we're coming up to the 80th anniversary of that. And that is a very interesting moment in the war, isn't it?
It's a pivotal moment because because it's out there. There's no more doubt.
Well, because at the start of this episode, we're saying, the Allies are thinking, oh, for God's sake, give up. Towards the end of the war, you've got a lot of people thinking, well, I don't particularly want to die if it's about to end. And everyone knows it's about to end sooner rather than or later. But once a thing like Auschwitz is revealed, it completely, I mean, it's certainly, and the effect of the discovery of Belsen in April on the British Army is absolutely electric, isn't it? And the Japanese try and talk trying to persuade the Americans with the idea that, look, it's just not worth carrying on fighting. It's too bloody for you. We're going to make it too bloody for you. But when a thing like Auschwitz is revealed, Western Allies and the Soviets think, well, I'm afraid you've got it coming. What is the 1,000-Year Reich? It built around genocide. The failure of that project must mean retribution for its crimes. If you're looking at it from a German perspective. We've talked about this before the podcast, the thumbnail Second World War history. It's D-Day, isn't it? Arnhem, Battle of the Bulge. War ends miraculously come May.
Yeah, and obviously it's not. It's incredibly complex what's going on. From peace feelers from leading Nazis like Karl Wolff and Kaltenbrunner, who we touched on and we'll be touching on again, through to the broad front, which means there's an awful lot going on a very broad front, all down the borders of Germany at this time. Yeah. To kind of, the outliers like Norway, where there's 300,000 German troops when absolutely nothing is happening at all.
Which is extraordinary.
It's sort of bonkers. And at the same time, you've got, operations in January in 1945 in the Arakan, in Burma. You've got major operations. January 1945 is invasion of Luzon, one of the largest islands in the Philippines and where Manila is and all the rest of it. In February, you've got Iwo Jima. In April, you've got Okinawa. You've got ongoing naval operations the whole time. Yeah. You've got US submarines causing mayhem, the last remaining Japanese shipping. You've got 88% of GDP spent on defense in Japan by 1944, end of 1944.
Blockade of Japan is called Operation Starvation. So let's not beat
let's
about the bush.
Let's not beat around the bush on this one. You've still got the firebombing of Tokyo to come in March.
Yeah. It's around about now, isn't it, that the American strategic bombing campaign, LeMay's out there. He's got a grip on things.
We won't bother with
and
precision anymore.
Can't bother with that. Doesn't work. So we're going to precision firebomb is what they call it.
And of course, down in New Mexico and all around the United States, there's 125,000 people working on the Manhattan Project, which is the atomic bomb. So, there is an awful lot going on. Factories still churning out a huge amount of stuff. It's incredible, really.
But also thoughts turning to the peace. What kind of society, for instance, in the UK, we're going to have? What we're going to do with Germany? The Morgenthau plan is a thing that's sort of been floated. Yeah. Which is the idea that Germany should be returned to agriculture, and which Goebbels makes great play of. They're going to deprive us of being a civilization. Another reason to go down swinging and all that sort of stuff. What people's visions of a post-war America are too, and global security and so on and so forth. What's going to happen to Poland?
Well, of course, Yalta is in February, and it's going to get carved up, and it's not going to end well if you're Polish or of a Western disposition.
And this is Churchill's sort of the thing on Churchill's conscience to an extent. Yeah. And he knows he can't do anything about it. Well, it's the reason why
Britain joined the war in the first place. So,
precisely. So, a bit embarrassing. But there we are. What we're going to do then in this next year is try and grapple all of this, isn't it? We're going to
some of it, yeah. We won't be able to do it by May or by August necessarily, but We'll see where we get to. Some stuff we'll just have to leave for other times, non-anniversary times. Basically, I'm reassured there's no shortage of things to talk about.
And maybe look at some of the aftermath. I know, strictly speaking, the podcast ends the minute the surrender is signed on the USS Missouri. But maybe, I mean, the Nuremberg trials are very interesting. Visions of peace, people's, British politics is absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, there's so much to talk about, isn't there?
Yeah.
So much to talk about. Well,
thanks for listening, everyone.
2025, can you believe it?
Yeah, I know. We started this in 2019, this podcast. Not outrun the Second World War yet, but the moment's approaching.
Yeah, I mean, as Rachel keeps saying, Second World War lasted 6 years. I've been living it for over 20.
You're another 20 coming, sweetheart.
Yeah. Any time soon. That's the bottom line.
Well, thanks everyone for listening. And of course, the other big thing happening in 2025, apart from the 80th anniversary of the Second World War, is we have Ways Fest.
Yes.
12th to the 14th of September.
It's in September.
One day they'll be doing an 80th anniversary of We Have Ways Fest in 2025. We will see you there. We sincerely hope. We have waysfest.co.uk for your tickets. It's going to be bigger and better than anything we've done before in terms of festival. We will see you again very soon. Cheerio.
Cheerio.
As promised, here's a clip from The Rest is Politics US miniseries.
Trump is naturally a conspiracy theorist fueler. He will fuel the fire of any conspiracy theory because he's always seen himself as an outsider, and he wants to foment the people from the outside to attack the people from the inside. So he's developing these ideas that he eventually uses in January, on the 6th of January. And the ideas are, there's misinformation out there, there's lies out there. Let's use these lies as fodder to attack the people on the inside. He's doing it with COVID. I think hydroxychloroquine works. You may remember this. I took hydroxychloroquine. Mr. President, you took hydroxychloroquine? Yeah, I'm on it. I took it. And this is the beginnings. This is the kernels of what's about to come. And it all starts with COVID, and it leads up to this insurrection, or as the president says, a very peaceful group of tourists descending upon the Capitol building.
If you want to hear the rest of the show, go and search The Rest is Politics US wherever you get your podcasts.